If your religion causes you to hate, then you need to change your religion. That's a quote or a meme that I've seen on Facebook quite a number of times over the last 2 to 3 years. I wonder if it might be possible to rephrase that quote to read as follows: if your God causes you to hate, then you need to change your God. Today we continue to explore and excavate the first of the 10 Commandments. In both Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5, the first commandment reads almost identically: I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Now it could be argued that the first of the 10 Commandments has cast a long and dark shadow over human civilization over the centuries, having been at the very least a catalyst for much of the religious exclusivism, division, and even violence in the world. It's true that as soon as you set up what you might regard as the true religion, worshipping the one true God, it raises questions about others who one regards as not following the one true religion or worshipping the one true God. Centuries of religious conflict have shown that this does not often end well. Claims of protecting the one true religion have led to crusades. It's also led to the Muslim invasion of North Africa, parts of Europe, and the Middle East from around 650 AD. It led to the 30 Years' War between Catholics and Protestants in Europe, where heretics were killed or burned at the stake. The claim to follow the one true religion has also motivated people in more recent history, for example, who joined ISIS only to commit the most horrendous crimes, with so-called infidels being beheaded. And this even included those that they believed were following the wrong sect of Islam. This dark shadow of religious exclusivism and religious violence is one that can be found already in the Bible itself, in Deuteronomy 17, just a few chapters later from Deuteronomy 5, where instructions are given, purportedly by God through Moses, that if anyone were to bow down and worship other gods, including the sun or the moon or the stars, such people should be taken to the city gates and stoned. This is primitive, barbaric religion, one has to admit. And we ignore this dark shadow of religious violence that has accompanied the first commandment at our peril, lest we end up doing the same thing. Secondly, despite what one can call the dark shadow of death and violence that has accompanied the first commandment with the threat of stoning in Deuteronomy 17, it can also equally be argued that there is also a light that shines from this commandment, despite the shadows that accompany it. The light firstly shines forth from the idea expressed in the preface to the first commandment, that this God of the Israelites is a God who sets enslaved people free. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. And from this central conviction flows some of the very best aspects of the religion of the ancient Israelites, the idea that God, Yahweh, is concerned with matters of justice and injustice, that Yahweh is concerned about the poor and those at the bottom of society. This is quite a profound religious conviction, because most of the other religions of surrounding nations were primarily concerned with fertility, manipulating the gods and goddesses to make sure that one's flocks and fields were fruitful and multiplied. And this often entailed going to visit the temple prostitutes to act out sexual rituals of fertility that would move the gods and goddesses to act on your behalf. But by contrast, from within this primitive and barbaric early people of Israel, who felt the conviction that Yahweh had acted on their behalf when they were oppressed slaves, a new form of religion began to grow, with a concern for justice and fairness and mercy. It remains one of the unique contributions of the Jewish faith and scriptures that prophets could stand up and call people to account for their religious failure to care for the poor, the widow, the orphan, and the oppressed. And all this flowed from this central conviction in the preface to the First Commandment that Yahweh had saved and rescued the people of Israel from slavery. Thirdly, it might be argued that light also shines forth from the First Commandment, from the growing conviction that flowed from this commandment that there is only one God, one supreme overarching wisdom and intelligence that holds all things together. Now, this wasn't necessarily the case in the earliest understanding of the Israelites. Early on, it seems that Yahweh was primarily conceived of as a tribal God. And so in the book of Judges 11:23-24, there is an assertion that the Israelites live under the power and protection of Yahweh, while the Moabite nation were understood to live under the authority of their own god, Chemosh. Each nation was understood to have their own tribal god. Now, many scholars argue that it was only later, as Israelite religion developed under the prophets and later in the exile, that Jewish thinking truly became monotheistic. In other words, they believed that there was only one God, that Yahweh was the one true God, and in fact was God of the whole world and all people, even if this God had only truly revealed himself to the people of Israel. And so in their earliest understanding of the First Commandment, "You shall have no God before me," it's most likely that many of the ancient Israelites understood this to mean that they owed their particular loyalty to their own tribal deity, to Yahweh, Jehovah, because in their understanding, Yahweh had rescued them from the land of Egypt, the land of slavery. And to worship Yahweh alone was not necessarily, therefore, a statement of monotheism. In other words, a belief that there is only one God. But perhaps the exclusivism of that first commandment found its logical conclusion in the later idea that indeed there is only one God. Joy Davidman, the wife of C.S. Lewis, suggests that this shift to the monotheistic idea that there is only one God was a major shift, and that before this shift the world was conceived of as a wild and chaotic place, a jungle of warring powers, wind against water, sun against moon, male against female, life against death, and presiding over the chaos was a pantheon of warring, backstabbing, quarreling and fighting gods and goddesses. But the conviction that there is one supreme deity who rules over all things begins to suggest that despite the seeming chaos of the universe is in fact one process, created by one maker, one divine intelligence or wisdom. Joy Davidman suggests that this was one of the greatest discoveries ever made. For although modern science may have ditched the idea of God, it operates from the basis that the universe is one process, and that idea flows directly from the development of monotheism. And so out of this rough and sometimes barbaric primitive people and religion, where people could be stoned to death for worshipping the wrong God, there were also growing some profound religious ideas about justice and mercy, and also the conviction that ultimately a seemingly chaotic world was ordered by one divine intelligence, one process that holds all things together. Lastly, I would like to briefly consider the first commandment in the light of the person and teaching of Jesus. It should always be remembered that Jesus was Jewish, and coming from his own Jewish roots, Jesus would have affirmed that there is only one God, one supreme divine intelligence and wisdom ordering the world. But perhaps Jesus' own unique contribution was the way in which Jesus took the Jewish religious concepts of justice and mercy to their logical conclusion, that God is love, and that to live in love is to truly know and worship God. This is perhaps most profoundly illustrated in the parable of the Good Samaritan. From a Jewish perspective, the Samaritan religion was defective and false. They did not belong to the one true faith. But in the parable, the Samaritan, the heretic, is the one who is revealed to be in true alignment with the Spirit of God. It is the Samaritan, and not the Jewish priest or the Jewish Levite, who is found to be acting in accordance with the law in Leviticus by loving his neighbor as himself. According to Jesus, the Samaritan, the unbeliever, the infidel, the heretic, is by implication much closer to fulfilling the greatest commandment, to love God with all his heart, mind, and soul, than the priest or the Levite. The Samaritan, according to Jesus, is the true worshipper of God, not because he believes in the correct doctrine, but because he is in harmony with the spirit of love, mercy, and compassion, which he acts out towards his sworn enemy, a Jew who has been hijacked, robbed, and left for dead. This has enormous implications for how one reinterprets the First Commandment. In the light of Jesus, the true worshippers of God are ultimately not the ones who hold the correct doctrine, who practice the correct religious rituals, or who read from the correct scriptures. The true worshippers of God are in fact those who act in ways that are loving, merciful, just, fair, and kind towards others, even if they belong to another group, even if they may be one's enemy. If the first of the 10 Commandments says, "You shall have no other God beside me," then the implication of the life and ministry of Jesus is that we should have no God except the God of love. Ultimately, what the parable of Jesus reveals is that it does not matter in the end which religion or faith tradition you belong to, or even by what name you may refer to God. In the end, the only thing that matters is kindness, compassion, mercy, and love. As the Apostle Paul says in Corinthians 13, verse 13, faith, hope, and love. These three remain, but the greatest of these is love. Amen.